Greetings, extraterrestrials, and welcome to History for Aliens, the History of Rome, Episode 5, The Roman Military. This slideshow will not cover nearly everything in the Roman military and how complex it was and how many weapons they used and what kind of weapons they used, but it will help give you a basic understanding of how the military worked, and this understanding will be needed and will constantly be referring to things that we've learned in this slideshow throughout the next 65 lessons. So let's begin. Here are three different shapes. The first rectangle has a cross going through it. The second on the bottom has a dot in the middle, and the third on the right side has a slashed line through it. Each of these three shapes represents a military unit. The one with the cross represents infantry. These are just general soldiers. There's not much special about them other than their sword and their shield. The bottom box with the dot represents artillery, bows, arrows, sometimes catapults. And the third shape with the slashed line going through it, this represents cavalry. Think horses, the equestrian elite. This is cavalry. If we were to look at this Roman buildup here, we can see we have our infantry in the front, 3 units of artillery in the back, and 2 units of cavalry to the side. I'm about to show you what a flank looks like. Now, flank in military terms will simply mean it's a trap. Admiral Akbar. So, what just happened? The cavalry went away. They disappeared into the trees, into the bushes. And these, let's call these just Spartans. The Spartans come out to meet the Roman line. And they're fighting, and then here comes the flank. The cavalry comes back in from out of nowhere and squeezes in on the sides of the Spartan line. This is what a flank is in military antiquity. It's just a trap. This is caligae. These were standard issue Roman military sandals with cleat-like nails placed on the bottom of them. This made for better grip, better traction when marching up and down the hills of the Italian peninsula and all across the Mediterranean. They were also lightweight, so they wouldn't drag you down. You could cross a river or water very easily in these if you had to. But they also made marching through cobblestone streets or paved streets very, very loud, especially when you have thousands of soldiers marching in unison across the streets. It would be a very loud, thunderous sound. The picture on the left is what the average early Republic Roman military looked like. The picture on the right shows us kind of what our fantasized version of the Roman military looked like. And it will come to look like this during the end of the Republic and into the age of the Empire. So you might be wondering, so why did the Romans go from the chainmail to the plated armor? Well, it was a lot lighter. It was easier to march in. It was also less vulnerable to arrows. And it also made it more comfortable during battle to move around in. The plates would bend and bow towards your movement and would adjust themselves naturally to fit your level of comfort. They worked a lot like how modern day football pads work. In antiquity, a lot of battles were simply pushing shields against shields. So if you're going to be in battle for 3 hours, you want to be wearing something that's going to allow you to be comfortable and lift your arms up without wearing you down very quickly. This is the scutum. This is a curved shield. Every piece of Roman armor, from their helmets to their plated pads to their shield, are all slightly curved and rounded. This is to make it easier to deflect swords. The picture on the left is the only surviving scutum from the Roman Empire. The picture on the right is a recreation. Notice the piece of metal in the middle? This was also there, so if the enemy hit their sword right into the middle of your shield, it would simply deflect, rather than potentially breaking your shield. This is the gladius. The gladius is a 20 to 25 inch sword. It was adopted from ancient Spaniard weapon design, and most of our modern day artifacts are actually found in lakes and rivers. This is kind of following Celtic sacrifice traditions where you would throw your weapons into the lake. Soldiers would thrust their gladiuses up horizontally, and this was to get in between ribs, get in between other plated armor, get into the throat. And this weapon will be used for 500 years, which really shows you how effective it would be. The Romans would not continue to use this for 500 years if it was not an effective weapon. And something cool I want to show now is the Testudo formation. This is when soldiers would lift their shields up around each other to protect each other, and they could march right into a group of enemies without opening themselves up to damage. And you would hold your shield there while the enemy is throwing rocks and slashing their swords at you, and you would sit there and sit there and sit there until you see an opening, and then you'd quick move your shield, thrust with your gladius, pull back, and bring your shield right back to protect yourself again. I believe this depiction comes from Trajan's Arch, and here's a modern day recreation. You can see they're holding their shields on their sides to protect them. They're holding shields above one another. They're peeking out so they can see what's going on without having a giant opening. This brings us to blacksmiths. Blacksmiths was a common occupation, especially in ancient times, when armor would be needed constantly. By the time of the Empire, legions would have their own personal blacksmiths traveling with them and making repairs and crafting as they went. Blacksmith literally translates into hitter of black metal. Here are two different depictions of a Roman blacksmith working, and here's another depiction of a Greek blacksmith found on an ancient Greek vase. He's smiting some sort of metal, maybe creating a sword. And you can see above him all the other crafts that he's created. He's created axes, swords, bows, double axes. So these blacksmiths were very handy to have around, and you want them, especially when you're going into battle against the whole Mediterranean like Rome is about to. And this brings us now to marching and songs in ancient military. We already talked about the Spartans using the double flute, the tibia, the flute with two pipes, to help march to their beat. And the Romans adopted this too. The Romans would march and fight using rhythmic music. This helped translate commands into sound, and just basic sounds are a lot easier to hear and to understand when you're in the heat of battle, rather than trying to listen for a specific command coming from one individual person. So this is the tibia. As I already mentioned, it's a flute with two pipes. This is the cornu. The cornu was a long metal instrument that would wrap around your body, kind of like a modern day tuba. And you can see they're right behind the generals and the leaders of the army, and they're listening for commands, and they're going to play certain sounds when the general wants them to stop or turn or be on the lookout. And now we're going to talk about the Roman version of the tuba. Here's a depiction of it. It was a long single-piped instrument, and we also find evidence of these being used all across the Mediterranean. The instruments would have been used not only for marching and military purposes, but also events and entertainments like the gladiator games. It's also known through several sources that, like modern militaries today, that the Roman legions would have also marched and sung to several different cadences. Cadences are kind of song chants, and these cadences not only boost morale, but they help the time pass by. If you're marching for 12 hours a day, you want something to help distract your mind. So now add all this together: the boots, the armor, the music, the songs, and the chants. This would make a moving Roman army very, very loud. The Roman army was built up of infantry, soldiers holding shields and swords. But they also used archers. As the expansion of Rome slowed down, archers became increasingly more common over infantry. One reason is because their pay was about half of that of an infantryman. The best archers came from Crete and Syria, and they were hired out to the Roman army as mercenaries. This brings us to the horse cavalry. The horse cavalry was much more expensive than the infantry, and as a result was very uncommon in the Roman military. The horse-owning part of the population became its own social class that we've already mentioned, called the equestrian class. So if you owned a horse, you were a part of the equestrian class. It was sort of the middle to upper class in Roman society. And like the archers in the Roman army, the horse cavalry was hired out, most famously and most commonly from Numidia, once Rome had conquered it. According to Polybius, who wrote during the middle of the Roman Republic, the army fought in 3 lines called the Acer Tripolix. The Acer Tripolix was formed with the youngest soldiers in the front and the oldest veterans in the back. The army would also have formed up in a checkerboard-like formation before battle, and this would allow for better flexibility during the battle. Once the battle got started, if the luck was on the Roman side, the middle line would advance, like that, leading to a much stronger offensive position. However, if things didn't seem to be going the Romans' way, and they needed an orderly retreat, the first line could simply back up into the second and third, leading to a much stronger and fortified organized retreat. We don't really know exactly how this worked in detail, but we do know that because of this and the maniple system, the Romans would have been much more flexible in battle and could have handled hills and such much better because each is working in a unit rather than the entire line working as one single line as seen up front in the blue. There's not much movement from their position to their attack, unlike the Romans, who, as you can see in the checkered board formations, they rotated and alternated a lot. Most battles probably looked like skirmishes with short periods of fighting followed by a brief retreat and then more fighting and then more retreat, wearing people down. And this is how Rome will come to conquer all of the Mediterranean, because of its well-trained, well-oiled military industrial complex. The discipline, the infantry, the training, the marching, the gladius, the scutum. This is what allowed Rome to one day conquer all of Europe. Not because of any political ideology, but because of the well-trained and well-disciplined military. Join us next time as we talk about the Forum, temples alongside the Forum, the 12 tables, and the true meaning behind SPQR. Thank you for watching History for Aliens. I hope to see you next time.